Morning, everybody. Welcome back to Safest Family on the Block. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me today is Marielle Melling. Hello, Marielle.
Hey, Jason.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're in for a real treat. Marielle has a degree in health education. She's the founder of Love and Life with Littles and the author of Peace Amidst the Mayhem, which may be the most accurately titled parenting book I've ever seen. She's passionate about simplifying parenting and helping others find more calm, confidence, and joy in their parenting journey. Marielle and her husband have moved 8 times since getting married, and she's still sane. And she's loved the opportunity to live in different places, make friends that live in various parts of the world. Marielle and her husband are the parents of 5 incredible kids, and you can see how she's helping families at loveandlifewithlittles.com or over on Instagram. And start simplifying your parenting life today with her help with her free simple systems starter guide, 3 steps for creating time-saving home systems that work. And really, we talked about what we want the meat of this conversation to be, but I wanted to start with that guide because one of the things I've noticed about family safety is that the times that we stop paying attention, and the times that we miss the cue, the time that the kid slips and falls, those are mostly the times that we're feeling overwhelmed, the times that we're in a hurry. And so even from the start, simplifying our lives, saving those moments of time can make our family safer. So could you take a moment and tell us a bit about this starter guide?
Yeah, absolutely. So when like you mentioned, I'm all about simplifying parenting life. And one of the things that parents over and over tell me is we talk about really 3 things that are vital. If we're going to say, okay, this is parenting life, this is what I want to do it well, I'm going to focus on these 3 things. So we have a relationship with our kids, and we'll talk about that today a lot. That is really first and foremost, the most important thing when it comes to our level of joy, our level of satisfaction in parenting for ourselves, for our kids, health and wellness, right? The number one predictor of long-term health and wellness is, according to the longest study on adult development, is the state of our relationships. Do we have healthy relationships? So relationships we focus on. Personal development we focus on, because as parents, we have to constantly be learning, keeping up with what's new, growing into the kind of parent we want to be. And the third is the sanity side of things, right? How do I get food on the table and get the kids to bed and keep the house clean and all of those kinds of things? And so many parents tell me, you know what, I want to read a book. I want to just relax with my kids. I want to do all these good things, and I don't have time. Everything is just so strapped right now. So we start out with the simple system starter guide, which is, like it says, 3 steps for creating time-saving home systems that work. So you can create a system or a routine around anything that you want to accomplish in your home. And every system that you create cuts down on the time wasted and the time spent doing things that don't matter, so that you have all that time that you want for things that do matter.
That sounds very much like the best security advice that you get as well, where having a plan for the emergency before the emergency saves those seconds you're spending trying to make a decision when you're distracted and panicked. I think it feels the same way, even though it's not the same thing as a mugger or a natural disaster. You knowing the routine and your kids knowing the routine for getting all 7 of you in the car in time to take them to school just makes everything simpler and less stressful and less time consuming. So that makes good sense.
Yeah, I mean, we can go through our days and spend a crazy amount of time making decisions about everything. We have so many choices right now in the way that the world is structured. And some of those choices don't matter at all, and yet we still spend time making them. And then we're too strapped to make the decisions that do matter. So
no, that makes good sense. It reminds me a bit, my wife came into this family, and with at the time my kids were 6 and 16, and she'd been a single person living in the city sort of situation, and I was showing her my meal planning system, and her response was, well, I kind of like just kind of going to the store and seeing what's available, then coming home and kind of figuring it out. And you're already laughing. I'm already laughing. And 6 months into
some people.
6 months into having a family, she was also laughing at the adorable naivete of that approach.
Especially feeding teenagers, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder how much they're going to eat this week.
All of it. Ever.
Yeah.
Right. But when I asked you what kind of topics you'd like to talk about on the show, you talked about 5 ways to basically get our kids to do the things we want and need them to do. And I love what you brought up earlier about how important your relationship with our kids are.
Yeah.
As you said, that longitudinal study about what makes happy adults and the idea of modeling healthy relationships. And then if you get deeper, almost every safety expert I've talked to on this show, ranging from suicide signs to cyberbullying to preventing child trafficking to spotting online predators, their best advice always boils down to raise a kid who trusts you to help them solve their problems.
Yeah.
And if we approach getting our kids to do the things we want to with an authoritarian viewpoint, with a, well, I'll make you do it, that erodes that absolutely important, not just personal skill, but security situation.
It truly does.
And you have a set of 5 techniques that help get those kids to do what they need to without becoming the parent bully.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you are the parent bully, I think this is really important to realize is that you get results, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get results. Sometimes you get them quickly, but the thing that we have to know about those kinds of results is that they come at a cost and they don't last. So when kids aren't with us, those results dwindle when they're not around us, right? If they haven't internalized the things that we're trying to teach them. So these 5 things are the way that we teach in a way that it sinks in and it connects with kids and they want to make decisions based on this knowledge.
That makes sense. The verbal judo system, which was made for law enforcement officers to deal mostly with inebriated people, which bears a lot of resemblance to toddlers, tweens, and teens.
Yeah, it does. It's like that other part of the brain is taken over.
Yeah, they draw a demarcation between compliance, cooperation, and collaboration. Where compliance is they do it because you've got a big stick and you'll hit them with it. Cooperation is, well, yeah, okay, I'll do it, but they might not do it next time. Whereas collaboration is they're on your team working to solve the problem together. And I think it's pretty clear which state we want our kids to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. So these 5 things, most of us need all of them anytime we actually want to learn something. If it is something that you want to influence behavior, right? If you just want to learn a cool fact, this is going to be total overkill. But if you want to influence beliefs and choices and behavior and have it stick long term, we need all 5 of these things. So should we hop in?
Let's do it.
Okay. Number 1, as the parent, is we have to learn. Okay. So we have to set aside time, be intentional about actually learning what we want to teach our kids. It's not good enough to do it just because it's tradition, just because it's what I've always done, just because it's habit. We have to be willing to say, is this actually true? Is this actually right? And you talk about this all the time, right? Safety myths. What are the real ways to protect our kids versus what's been passed down or what we maybe think. So we have to figure out what's really true and what's really best for our kids. And that does take time. It takes setting aside time and being committed to saying a humble confidence is what we like to talk about, right? We have the confidence that we can learn it, that we can teach our kids it, but we have the humility to know that we can't do it alone. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here, because if you're watching this show, you are participating in lifelong learning, right? It's listening to podcasts, reading books, having meaningful discussions with people. Isn't it cool when you talk to people and you actually talk about ideas, right? And you talk about what's actually happening in the world and what it means for our kids and all those kinds of things. So that is number 1. We have to actually learn what it is we want to teach our kids.
That makes really good sense. I mean, when you get to that, hey, I need you home by 11. Well, why?
Yeah.
We should probably be able to answer the why.
Why? Yeah.
And not just for that one thing, but if our kids grow up understanding that when we have a request or we set a rule, that we've reached that rule through research and thought and consideration, then sometimes we don't even get asked why that much, because they trust that, okay, they got a good reason for it, even if I don't quite get it right now.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to talk about how to communicate those things in the next steps. But that is super important to start with that and to be sure of it, right? Because sometimes when you get down to it, it's like, oh man, I don't even have to worry about teaching this because it doesn't really matter. Some things matter a lot more than others. So that's the first thing. Number two, then, when we all know, but it doesn't make it easy, is to model what we want to teach. We have to show our children what we want them to do themselves. And if you are learning something new and you're like, oh, I'm not good at this yet, that is okay, right? That is okay. You don't have to perfect yourself before you try and teach the kids, but we have to be really honest about that and really trying to change and implement those behaviors ourselves as well. I think a really big one on this is, do we text and drive, right? We have drivers in training all the time from, I have drivers in training from the ages of 3 to 14, right? And they are paying attention. And even if it is a slow road and I am pretty sure I'm going to be okay to send this text, do I send it, right? Because I'm showing that lesson to my kids. So that's one way that we've chosen to be intentional and model is I will hand my phone to my child in the front seat and say, hey, I'm driving right now. Will you please send a text to dad? So that they are seeing, oh, look, mom actually does it too.
Oh, yeah, kids absolutely learn far more from what they see than from what they hear.
Yeah.
And it's vitally important. One of the earlier guests on the show, a paramedic, made the same point about wearing helmets while bicycling, skateboarding, whatever other vehicle of choice, but also putting on your seatbelt, all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, do we think the adult brain is stronger than the kid's brain? Like, where does that come in, right? We do have to model it.
Yep. You get speeding laws are one thing. The laws of physics are an entirely different and more important set of laws. One point that you made there that I think is hugely important is also that we can model for our kids learning new things, changing our minds when we see new information, and also, and especially I think for a lot of the guys out there, screwing up and trying again.
Yes.
A lot of us are really scared to admit, to let go of that, all of our kids until they get to be about 6 or 7 think we're Superman or Superwoman. They think we're flawless exemplars. And it can be hard for some of us to let that go, but to model healthily making mistakes and adjusting your approach, I think is hugely valuable.
Absolutely. I actually sent out an email about that this morning. We just had our beginning band concert this week, and it's Old MacDonald, a little bit out of tune, a little bit too loud, horns blowing where they shouldn't be, all of that. And afterwards, it was a standing ovation. Everybody recognizes this is a rite of passage. Making mistakes, not doing things perfectly, that is the path of progress. And we absolutely need to model that for our kids. So true. I think another important thing that we need to model is, are we being assertive? Do our kids seeing us making and holding boundaries, healthy boundaries? Because that is so big when it comes to personal safety, healthy relationships, all those kinds of things. And that is something that our kids can inherit from us. Are we getting walked all over? Do we let our kids walk all over us in our adult relationships? Do they see that assertiveness as opposed to authoritarian or being too submissive?
And also that avoiding that one thing that I think most people tend to be, because we're taught to be, polite, is where we wait until we're angry to ask for change. And so the only model we see is negotiating and arguing while angry, as opposed to asking when we're still in a pretty copacetic state of mind, but we see the problem and we can then address the problem rather than the emotions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's helpful as parents to say, would I want my child to treat somebody else that way, then I'm going to set a boundary and they're not going to treat me that way either. Right. Okay. So that's modeling, really working on ourselves. We could go into forever how to work on that, but we got to be cognizant.
I like that we're almost halfway there, and the first two are about us.
Yeah,
about
exactly.
how we come to it.
Exactly.
Which I think reflects one of the most important truths about parenting is most of the things that we see that our kids do that drive us nuts start with us.
Yep. It's like this really cute mirror that suddenly isn't so cute when you're like, oh, it is a mirror.
Yeah. Don't you love that when you complain to your parents about something your kids do and they just
Yes. I remember going to my mom saying, oh my gosh, Mom, I remember you telling me that I was like this, but was I really like this? And she's like, oh, you were way worse. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
How did you do it? And then I was all ears, right? How did you do it? Yeah.
All right. So what's our third step?
Yeah. So, well, I was going to say, as you said, like we do our kids a huge service when we start with ourselves. And I think it is really interesting that as, all professionals, doctors, teachers, our finance people, they all engage in continuing education. Yeah. Right. And yet somehow when we step into this parenting role that we didn't get a degree for, we think that we're supposed to be able to just rock it. No, it takes work, it takes effort, it takes continuing education. So we work on ourselves. Okay. Number 3 then is to talk about it. So there's this interesting study that was about, they were looking at 12 to 18-year-olds and did these kids choose to give to charities or to volunteer their time, those kinds of things. And they found that kids whose parents volunteered were 27% more likely than their peers to volunteer. But then they also found that the parents who talked to their kids and modeled, those kids were 47% more likely to volunteer. So we always say, right, actions speak louder than words, but actions and words speak loudest. So most of us are actually really good at talking. We can throw down a lecture like nobody's business, but the way that we talk makes a big difference in how our kids are going to take it in and whether or not they're going to accept it and those kinds of things. So in education, we call it scaffolding, and that just means taking the knowledge that you have and building on top of that. So when we're introducing something to our kids, we want to talk about it first in relation to something they already understand, something they already care about, so that we're connecting with why should you care about this, right? And then the other thing that we want to do is make it not a lecture. It is much more a discussion. They've done the DARE program. I'm sure listeners are probably familiar with that, drug alcohol resistance education, but it was a program that was in the schools that police officers would come in and teach in order to prevent drug and alcohol abuse. And it was very widespread. So they were able to gather a ton of data about whether or not these programs worked. And what they found was that there were really 2 things that set the programs that worked apart from those that didn't. The ones that worked, meaning the kids actually didn't do drugs and alcohol, they, number 1, had engagement with the officer. It wasn't the officer just talking, sharing stats, sharing interesting information. There was a lot of engagement. And the second factor was that those programs that worked lasted over a sustained period of time. So when we're talking about these things, it has to be discussion. We are asking questions a lot more than we are lecturing, and we are visiting it. We're coming back to it over and over and over. Right.
No,
so
that makes very good sense. Yeah. One of my mentors early on used the term, are you talking to them or are you talking at them?
At them. Yes. Love that. Yeah. So when you're thinking, okay, I want to teach my child about this thing, whatever the topic is, one of the smartest things you can do is brainstorm a list of questions. Okay. 5 questions. What are questions that I could ask my child to get them thinking about this? And one of the really important reasons that talking is so important is that it engages our logical brain, right? So we basically have 2 parts of our brain, like lots of different parts that are working in tandem to do 2 different things. We have the logical part and the emotional part. Our logical brain, our prefrontal cortex, that is what we use to make decisions, to plan for the future, to be rational, right? All of those kinds of things. And talking is one of the ways, and thinking, connecting, making those logical connections is one of the ways that we engage the logical brain. And we start putting into that decision-making part of the brain, oh, this is a decision I want to make. Okay.
Yeah, that scans with what neuroscience I know, that if we're using this brain instead of this brain for that, we're picking up a wrench and trying to drive in a nail.
Yes.
It's just, you might get it done, but it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. Okay. So that's number 3, is to talk about it. Number 4 then actually does do with this part of the brain. And that is we need to provide experience for our kids. We need
Mhm.
to let them feel what it feels like to actually make this choice or do this thing, whatever it is that we want them to do. Okay. And that is because we also need our emotional side of the brain in
Mhm.
on it.
Yeah.
So how do we create that experience? There are tons of ways with kids. One of the really powerful ways is role play, because we can provide that experience without thrusting them to the wolves, right?
Mhm.
And even older kids, you might think it sounds cheesy, but hey, offer them a cigarette and see what they say, right?
Mhm.
Not a real cigarette, but role
Mhm.
play those situations.
Mhm.
Role play, what do you do when somebody sends you a text that is inappropriate or that makes you feel uncomfortable or whatever it might be? Role play those
Mhm.
situations with your kids. Another one that's especially fun with little kids is to make it a game, make it fun, because we need to get in a lot of repetitions, right?
Yeah, I
Music.
find it's interesting. A lot of people kind of they feel a little uncomfortable, a little silly with that.
Mhm.
Um, but I then remind a lot of the people in my circles, of course, are martial artists, military. Is like, hey, how many times have you gone on the mat and practiced self-defense technique?
Exactly.
How is that different from role play? How many times have you gone
Right.
to the range?
Yeah.
We are good at what we practice.
Yeah. Exactly. So we're giving our kids opportunity to practice this in a way that they
Hmm.
feel it, in a way that their
Hmm.
bodies take the action, take the motion of doing this thing. Another really great way to help our kids feel and experience is through music. So music
Hmm.
is really interesting because like when we're walking, it lights up a part of our brain. When we're reading, it lights up a part of our brain. When we engage
Hmm.
with music, it actually lights up 5 different parts of our brain. It's very engaging. And you've seen this, right? If
Yeah.
you put something that you want to teach your kids to music, they will remember it. I still
Hmm.
remember the song that I used to learn my phone number when I was probably 5 years old. I'm not going to sing it because then you'd all know my parents' home phone number. It's the same thing, but we remember,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Music sticks with us.
Yeah.
So can you make
Yeah.
up a little ditty to help your kids
Yeah.
remember your address or what they should do in a fire? Or have you ever
Hmm.
heard of the Safety Kids?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those old songs.
Hmm. Yeah. They
So
work.
they
No.
totally work.
Yeah, I passed AP English because the band Iron Maiden has a lot of songs about classic literature.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
I would not have passed if that weren't so.
Without that.
And it's the same, but it's the same thing because it engages the multiple parts of, you know, interesting side topic. I got my degree in psychology, and I wanted to do my thesis on neurologically why music induces emotional states, but this was a pre-MRI, so nobody had any idea.
Nobody knew.
So there
Yeah.
was there was no research for me to use, so I had to do it on sports psychology. But
Also
it's
interesting.
yeah, very interesting, but not this fascinating thing that we're talking about now, how we can use music to make our kids safer and get them more on board with the things we need and want them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that is really
Mhm.
important to know is that our non-conscious brain
Mhm.
is super involved in what we actually do,
Yeah.
right? Like
Mhm.
this logical brain says, hey, I'm gonna like eat really healthy today. And then it's like, oh, donut. Another
Yeah.
donut. Really good donut, right? So
Mhm.
that non-conscious part of our brain is super active. And by non-conscious, we just mean we don't see the process happening. We don't
Yeah.
actually know what we're thinking, but we see the results, either
Mhm.
in a feeling, a thought, an action, those kinds of things. And
Mhm.
like you would know this, all of our research has shown that
Mhm.
non-consciously we can do a, a lot of things, right? We
Yeah.
can have goals activated. We can
Mhm.
act more polite and more rude.
Mhm.
We can choose a certain soda
Mhm.
over another soda, right? So,
Mhm.
what is helpful to know is that our non conscious prioritizes things that have been done frequently,
Mhm.
recently, or with a lot of emotion. So,
Mhm.
if we want our kids to get their non conscious involved in these decisions that we want them to make, we need to do
Mhm.
this thing frequently, recently,
Mhm.
and with a lot of motion, right? So another way that we can get this experience in is like through movies and
Mhm.
books and telling family stories, right? Because those bring out the
Mhm.
emotion. We get connected to the characters, and then they make this decision, or they go through this hard thing, or they are in a scary situation, or they all of these things. And
Mhm.
so we can connect and like keep bringing it up
Mhm.
in ways that they feel it.
And that is a bit of a workaround for the fact that this part of the brain isn't fully developed until our mid-20s.
Yeah.
So when we're trying to get a 7-year-old, sometimes kind of shortcutting by getting the emotional association can be very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also know that when we are tired, when we are stressed, this part of the brain is not as strong, right? And it is limited. There's only so much that it can think about and do at one time. So we really want to get the emotional part of our brain and the non-conscious part of our brain on board with these kinds of decisions and these kinds of things that we want to teach our kids.
No, that absolutely scans.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay, so and then number 5, we talked about a little bit already, but that is to love them no matter what. All righty, so we know this. If you are listening to this, if you are in Jason's circle, you love your kids, right? We attract people that care about their kids. You're not neglecting them. That's a given. What is difficult though is, do our kids feel that? Right? The same way that we use all these things to teach something, we need to use all these things to teach them that we love them. Okay. And we see this a lot with older kids who will say something to the effect of, you know what, I know my mom cares about me. I know my mom loves me, but she cares more about having a perfect kid than she does about what I actually think. Right. And so we start to kind of like slice and dice where we care about them or how they feel that we care about them. So we can check in. What do they really feel? And where we see almost the most important relationship building moments are when our kids mess up. You've talked about this a little bit already, right? Is when they mess up, how we interact with our kids when they mess up says a lot about our future relationship with them. And deep bonds are formed in those challenging moments. Actually, Matt Larson of The Happy Child talks a lot about this. He talks about how with, prehistoric or early humans, when you're in this very dangerous and very intense environment, who is going to be there when you call out, right? When you are in danger and you call for help, or when you are outcast and pushed out of the group, who's going to come rescue you? Who's going to be the one that is there when times are hard? So how we respond within those, when the kids don't listen, when the kids don't apply what we are teaching them, how are we showing them love in that moment?
And one piece on that, this was from an earlier guest whose name is escaping me right now because it's still quite early. My brain's this isn't functioning yet. I haven't had enough coffee. Tired. Randy Champeau really stressed that, because in some of the situations we're going to be angry, and a lot of the time we're going to be angry because 5 minutes ago we were scared. Where it is absolutely okay to say to your kid, hey, I am too upset right now to have the conversation we need to have. I'm going to take 5 minutes, you take 5 minutes, and then let's come back and talk. And it is absolutely okay to give yourself permission to do that. We need to do that and that again is modeling for our kids how to talk to their spouses and their kids and their friends when they get into those deeply emotional moments. Yeah.
One of the most powerful things that we can learn to do is deep breathe. Right. That is so huge because as you mentioned, like we go into these situations and something stresses us and we are flipped into that fight or flight where it feels dangerous. And when that happens, we are fully emotional. We are working to survive, and that's important. So when we deep breathe, it sends that message to our brain. Oh, look, if I can breathe like this, it means that I'm not actually being chased by a wild animal. Right. And it is one of the easiest, simplest, quickest ways to calm that part of the nervous system and invite the logical decision making, like how do I want to talk to my kid, part of the nervous system back into the situation. So one thing I love to teach is just a simple mindfulness technique that I call the butt principle. And you can use this anytime you're starting to feel upset, something, the moment has passed and it's not actually dangerous, right? But you're ready to talk about it, whatever. So you take 3 deep breaths calm yourself, and you feel what you're feeling, right? Studies show us that when we don't feel our emotions, when we try to suppress them, it actually makes them worse. It's like, hey, you're ignoring me. I'm going to keep knocking at your door, right? So feel what you feel, recognize that, and then use the BUT principle. My mom always used to say BUT stands for bottom underlying truth. Okay. So we say, I am feeling whatever it is I'm feeling. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling ignored. But the bottom underlying truth is that I want to have a strong relationship with my kid. So in this moment, I am going to choose to, and then we get to move forward with intention. And that's a really quick way to switch out of the high emotion into our thinking brain that lives with intention.
Now, that makes really good sense. I've often said that anger is just fear dressed up for Halloween.
Yeah.
And that underlying truth of I'm feeling all these emotions now because my kid just scared the crap out of me. That they were half an hour home. And so I'm sitting here thinking about car wrecks. I'm sitting here thinking about a date going wrong. I'm sitting here thinking about him hanging out with members of a gang. And they came home and he had a flat tire, but I was still really scared.
Yeah. Or, and then it's worse when I was like, oh, I just forgot to call or whatever, right? So then it's like, oh, it was totally preventable.
Yeah. And on that topic, you mentioned something earlier about how, we come to parenting without a degree, without continuing education, and this expectation that we're going to crush it. And that's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I think a lot of us walk into it thinking, I don't need to learn this. My parents raised me. I can manage. But then when those moments hit and those emotions start going, we also have that shoulder devil going, you are screwing up the most important thing you will ever do.
Yeah.
And that just slides right into all that fear and frustration and anger that was already there, and can make it that much harder to keep it together. And just remembering that we're all, again, modeling that how to screw up and do better, even if we were the ones that screwed up.
Yeah. And studies show we don't have to be perfect for our kids, right? Repair is incredibly important. So if we make a mistake and we ignore it, that is detrimental. That is a big deal when you're talking about relationship. But when you make a mistake and you repair and you go back and you're honest and you like say, hey, I get it. I get that this hurt you. I get that you were scared when I screamed at you. I get that, and you let them share their own emotions and feelings and really process those things. And then you show that extra love and attention afterwards, like that repairs the relationship. And we don't have to be perfect, right? Nobody is getting this right 100% of the time. Nobody.
That's what I keep telling myself.
We're all in good company.
Excellent. Yeah. Marielle, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to my listeners today. Before we go, you give talks all over the place. Just earlier this year, you headed up an international parenting summit. You have a lot of interviews. This ain't your first rodeo. Is there something that you don't get enough opportunities to talk about? And if so, hold forth.
Oh my goodness. I get to talk a lot. So I love all the things I talk about. I think that something I would leave kids with would be, or parents with, is what a special privilege it is to be a parent. We know that. I mean, that first time when we get to hold a baby and those milestone moments, we know that. Sometimes in the day-to-day, we lose it, right? We lose touch with how incredible it really is to be the one that they come to be the one that hears their fears, to be the one that they feel safe enough to blow up around, to be the one that is relying on us to protect them and to teach them and to, usher them into adulthood in a way that they're going to be successful. And so I would encourage parents, just take an extra second to love on your kid today. Let the dishes go, let the job wait, let whatever it is else that you need to do, look in their eyeballs, tell them you love them, and listen to them. Like I said, we're good at talking, but the more we listen, that's one way that our kids feel really loved. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's a special place, a special privilege to be in. So take advantage.
It is. And it is easy to forget that sometimes because, parenting is really hard and a lot of it's surprisingly boring.
Yeah,
but it's
you get in the mundane and the day-to-day. And I have to remind parents of this all the time. If you were in an orphanage, changing diapers,
Yeah.
feeding children, how would you feel about yourself?
Yeah.
You'd probably feel pretty darn good, right? So what is the difference between helping that child and helping this child that would be an orphan if it weren't for you? Right? So it's easy to lose sight.
And those moments, those moments where like, buddy, I was tired about talking about Pokemon like 3 weeks ago. But
really
it's still
the Spidey and Friends episode again. Whoa.
Again. But still and then remembering in those moments that, this is this magical part of this ridiculous, crazy journey that we're on. Or if necessary, sometimes this is the price of admission for seeing their first step and having them and having them introduce you to their girlfriend because your opinion matters.
Yep. It's not every moment is pretty, right? But it can be really beautiful. Yeah. So I have one, I have to share this because I just thought of this last night. But I was like thinking about these 5 things. I'm like, I need a cool acronym or something. Right? Cool. So
we got a focus group. The acronym.
Remember what we've talked about today. To remember what we've talked about today. So when we want to help our kids learn anything, we can take through these 5 things. And this is a mnemonic that I came up with. I'm quite proud of it. So I'm just going to share it. Let me teach everything lovingly. Let me teach everything lovingly. Learn about it yourself, model it, find a way to talk about it in a way that relates and that you're asking questions. It's really discussion, experience where they feel the emotion of actually doing that thing and doing it with love, no matter what, especially when they don't listen.
That is sharp.
That's how
you heard it here first, folks. Excellent. Well, Marielle, thank you again so much for coming on today. Folks, go to our website, Lovin' Life with Littles, and that's without the G, lovinlifewithlittles.com to get that system starter guide and find out more about her wisdom. I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
I appreciate what you're doing, Jason. Keep it up.
Well, thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Bye.